Hello everybody, welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, bringing you a very special review. This is my spoiler-free review on Dune Part 2, which is releasing in cinemas next Friday, the 1st of March. I have been very fortunate in watching the film tonight. At the time this video going up, it's the middle of the night in the UK, it's the early evening in America, and I have seen the film in full. I've just got home from a screening in London, the IMAX in Leicester Square. So I have seen it on IMAX, not 70mm IMAX. That'll be next Friday at the BFI in London. But I'm going to give some spoiler-free thoughts on the film, a little bit of talk on the book as well, but I won't be doing any spoilers for the book stuff, any spoilers for the film stuff. This is almost my initial reactions, and like many of our anticipated films, the big films of the year, there will be a second review on this later on in the month. Probably after the opening weekend. There's a lot of other Dune stuff. I'm going to be announcing who our interview guest is on Friday's video. But I also want to hear from everybody at home. So please do comment your thoughts on Dune Part 2. If you've seen the film, I want to know your thoughts. But please do keep it spoiler free. What your thoughts are you looking forward to it? Any actors in particular that jump out that you are excited to see on the screen? It's clearly one of my most anticipated films of the year, and it's probably the same for a lot of other people too, without being too judgmental. So I'm very excited to see what people think. And if you're new to the channel, if you're new to our videos, then you can go find us on social media where we announce a lot about other reviews and discussions. That's linktree.com/cinemasavvy, and that's got links to our Facebook, Twitter, Letterboxd and Instagram. But I mentioned I'm here to talk about Dune Part 2, and I guess I'm going to really quickly kickstart with my thoughts on Part 1. I adore it. It's one of the best science fiction films of the last couple of decades, but it is a Part 1. And it is adapting the first half of the book, a book I'm familiar with, that I've read. I've now literally finished reading Dune Messiah as well. So that's something to take into account for Part 2, that I may have differing knowledge to those that are attending. Some people might have read none of it. Some people might have read the first book. Some might, like myself, might have read 2 of them. Others might have read everything over the decade. So your experience with Dune, I do wonder, comes down to your knowledge of the source material. Nothing wrong if you've not read anything too, but as I said, I'm keeping this spoiler-free for you all. But I was excited. I was gutted this film got delayed. I understood why the film got delayed, but it has kept me going knowing that we were going to get this soon. Once that March date truly got locked in, but we knew it was the last, the last of the delays. It wasn't going to be moving it to later on in the year to push for next year's Oscars, which maybe I'll talk about at the end, who knows. But I was so hyped. I was very, very fortunate to be there today. And I think I've said this in a few big videos recently, but I do not take it for granted seeing big films early. Yes, I'll be seeing them on release day. I've obviously booked 2 showings already for release day and the day after. But I cannot comprehend how very fortunate it is to be in the cinema watching this, knowing it's coming out. And I hope this review maybe does something justice for what you want to find out, and kind of kicks on my initial thoughts on this film, that cinematic experience. It's something I talk about so much. This film delivers with that, and I kind of want to jump in and say something, because I don't think I sent it as a tweet, but words like magnum opus were the first things I saw when I saw the social embargo go after the premiere last Thursday. And by the way, I went to that premiere for the fan stuff. Was very cool, met some really lovely people, and it was insane to see all of that in person too. But obviously you don't watch the film in those sorts of things. So and Austin Butler did the Elvis voice, which is great. But going back to that, sorry. The social media embargo lifted, and I tried to avoid stuff and I'm looking forward to it, but it was almost impossible to avoid how people spoke about this film. Christopher Nolan comparing it to Empire Strikes Back in this, and a lot of great sequels get compared to Empire Strikes Back, a lot of great sequels get compared to The Dark Knight, but to have The Dark Knight director compare this to The Empire Strikes Back has gravitas to me. That's more than it could mean from any other person in the world, if I'm being completely honest. There's a great video with Denis and Christopher Nolan discussing it, I think, at the Tenet preview, because there were links to Dune Part 2 in that. Different conversation, but I was starting to get more... I was already excited. I have high expectations for this film. I'd seen the quality of the first one. There's a great discussion on that Part 1, myself and Reese. I just want to plug quickly too. Thank you to everybody that checked that out. That's sort of blown up, which I didn't expect. But the anticipation of this is at high, the expectations are high, and I try not to have high expectations for films, but it's quite hard not to when you have one of the best filmmakers in the world doing his second half of the book, deemed unfilmable, science fiction, my favourite genre, knowing the second half of the book and what is to come. The excitement levels had been there, and I kid you not, watching that film today on that cinema screen, one of the biggest screens in the country, I believe, when it's IMAX, fully projected in IMAX, I don't think I've got the buzzwords to talk about it, if I'm really honest. Not that I'm speechless, but everyone's chucked the obvious ones: masterpiece, magnum opus, all those sorts of things, the pull quotes you'll see on posters. But for me, it's about the cinematic experience, and I genuinely had sat there for 2 hours and 40 minutes just in such a thrilling mood, and that's a weird thing to say, but I felt so happy watching this film. And I don't really talk about my emotions watching films, bar when it makes you laugh, makes you cry, but this film had everything I wanted and more. There are action set pieces where I was just sort of blown away in excitement, and the visuals and how they've pulled this world together. And I know we said that a couple of years ago with the part one when it came out, but to see the story continue into part two and for it to feel as fresh as the first one did whilst delivering the second half of the book, I cannot comprehend how a director has been able to do this. This will be looked back upon as one of the greatest science fiction films of all time, and that is a massive thing to say before the film has actually released. But I'm that confident with it. And akin to it being a part two, you get part one, which is all the setup, and part two is the execution, and the execution is utterly flawless. The conscious decisions to put some characters in part two and not in part one, like Fraiser, played amazingly by Austin Butler. I adore him. I speak about a lot on the channel, it seems, but people are talking about Austin Butler in this as well. He's magnificent. I'll talk about some more cast members too, but I couldn't really imagine the scale of this film. And again, if you're familiar with the book, you know where the story is heading, alongside where the book ends with this one too. That you're getting all these incredible action set pieces, but the climactic battle per se, or action set pieces, is hand-to-hand combat like the first one. And even seeing that directed in a completely different level to how it's done in the first one, I absolutely loved it. I can't look past Denny, and there are so many amazing components that go together with this. The production design, the costumes, the cinematography, the visual effects, the soundtrack, all these kinds of things that I'm listing off is a massive disgrace to list them off in that way. It is an incredible film. And as I said, I don't have the buzzwords people like using for this. I can only talk about my experience watching it on that big screen, and the experience is honestly felt like no other. There are certain films you watch at the cinema that you'll remember for the rest of your life. There are ones that you'll pinpoint going back to as I saw this X amount of times. Where were you when you watched this? In recent years, I think Top Gun Maverick has had that effect. I think Barbenheimer as a combined event has had that effect. Avengers Infinity War / Endgame, and it doesn't happen often. I've listed some recent ones, of course, but people will be talking about Dune for decades. And the craziest thing is we're potentially only 2 films into a trilogy too. Messiah is not confirmed to be being done yet. I'm sure it will be. I think it's like part 2. It feels more inevitable than it does a potential opportunity. And what this film does very well, and again, someone that's just finished reading Messiah today, it puts you in this perspective that Denis, as a director of the story, he does make some changes from the book. And it's not a case of I'm setting up this for down the line. It's not doing that at all. It tells the story of the first book by the end of part 2. But they're able to pull in some of the thematics, some of the story threads from Messiah into Dune part 2. And I think it's setting up for a trilogy. I'm not saying it's like a blatant middle chapter. There's no cliffhanger endings and whatnot. But it does feel like we are going to get that third film. And the perspective of myself as a book reader too, not to do the whole Game of Thrones in the books this, in the books that, but there are conscious changes made, just like the first part. Some of them I think are so much better. I guess the first one, everyone spoke about the Baron being far more of an outright villain, and we get moments such as this in this film too. And there are some big moments that are switched around, and certain characters that crop up or might not crop up. It's going to be interesting hearing about, I'd say, the diehard fans who've maybe read it multiple times. As I said, I've read the first one, the second one, so I don't have the knowledge past that in Children of Dune, but it's such an interesting thing to know where this world could go and what we might get as a film. But again, for one director's vision to be attached to this, and I kind of want to not compare it to Lord of the Rings, but it's impossible at this point, isn't it? Harry Potter has got a great one with the Deathly Hallows of the part 1 and the part 2, but it feels like we are witnessing film history. It feels like the first event film of 2024. I don't know how many of those we're going to get. I also think this is probably the best film of 2024, and it's February. It's probably going to be a contender. Let's say that. It will be a contender by the end of the year. I don't want to talk about Oscars because the Oscars haven't even happened for this year. But had this have come out in November, I don't think Oppenheimer would be getting a walk in the park on its Oscar sweeps. I think Dune would be right there with it in the discussion. testament to, I think, the two greatest directors working today, certainly of the 21st century, I'd say, that have emerged in this period. And I just think it's an incredible film that has to be seen on the biggest screen possible. And I mentioned IMAX. If you're able to get to one of the BFI showings, the showing at 70mm, I cannot wait to see it on there. I'll talk about it in the big spoiler discussion. But just witnessing it in IMAX, the sound design in this film, the visual effects, I mentioned those, the combined auditorium feeling you have of riding these gigantic worms. It's sort of perfect time of Gareth Edwards being announced with Jurassic Park today, but we have a sense of scale. And it's a really tricky thing to do in cinema, is providing scale in a desert setting. And I think Denis does it in such a unique way that other filmmakers, for some reason, haven't latched onto. And at times you sort of can't tell it's visual effects. It looks so incredible, the textures on the worms, the cliffs and whatnot. We know they obviously shot it on location too, but the balance of visual effects combined with practical effects, combined with being on set and location, it was remarkable. It was honestly remarkable. And again, it feels like we're in Arrakis. It feels like we're on another planet. It doesn't feel like we just went to this desert, we went to this area and we just shot there for a couple of weeks. It felt like science fiction, and there are moments in this where we get to go to other planets, just like in the first one when we're spending time with the Harkonnens. And this time, of course, we've got the Emperor, who, it sounds still weird to say in a non-Star Wars video, but of course this predates Star Wars. But even spending time with Christopher Walken and Florence Pugh, who have great chemistry from the scenes they have, there's a real presence there. And it's these things I was really excited for to come into part 2 that had intentionally been held off. And I just think this film captures everything that Dune did as a book. I think it captures what the audience is looking for, and maybe as a fan of science fiction or a fan of film. And I think it's opening your eyes to new ideologies. It's a very different type of blockbuster. This isn't an action set piece. It's certainly far more action than the first film, but it is the second half of the book. So naturally, the big action set pieces do come in this. And every single one you get is honestly at times just jaw-dropping. I think I spoke about in the first one about, I love the concept of the shields when the sort of the bombs are going in them on the attack on the Atreides in that first film, and to see more of the warfare, to see these hear new sound effects, it felt like something new. I always talk about the gun in Aliens that the Colonial Marines have. We have new weapons in this that just sound fucking incredible. And I just sat there in awe, having the time of my life watching some of these sequences, watching some of these set pieces. And the cast too, I haven't mentioned Timothée Chalamet, of course, playing Paul Atreides. I haven't seen all of his films. I've seen a good chunk of them. But I felt like this is the most commanding I've seen him on screen. It felt so different to what I've seen him. And even off Dune Part 1, we are really developing the story of Paul Atreides. And Timothée Chalamet is paramount to that. But somebody who I actually think comes in, and I don't want to say steals the spotlight. I think she's the best performer in this film is Zendaya. And I know she had a very limited role in the first one, but what they've done is, just like the first film, they have made some changes from the book. They have developed her character so much more for this one. And I think Zendaya is honestly giving one of the best performances, being there from, I guess, the start of the film through to the end. And like in the first one, it was great to see that relationship develop between the two of them. And as I kind of mentioned, it being a part 1 and part 2, I can't wait to watch these back to back properly. I think they'll have such a differing effect on these, but Zendaya is incredible. I've spoke about Austin Butler, who is superb. I've spoke about Florence Pugh, Christopher Walken too. It's such a great ensemble cast. There are some people that don't return who people think might have, and I guess there's other people that may crop up. But I just can't fathom this incredible achievement. I don't want to one by one go through everybody what I thought of them, but a character I spoke about in the first film, who is all about a character, is the soundtrack by Hans Zimmer. A remarkable soundtrack. It's streaming this Friday, so I'm going to be listening to it. I've seen the film, so of course I'm going to listen to it. But there are certain cues in this, and there is a moment where there is a new theme for a character in this, and I was just like, I need to hear this, I want to listen to this. I know there's a couple of songs that are online for people to listen to already, but the soundtrack, once again, what you think of Dune, you think of the sound of Dune. The visuals are as powerful as the music that has come from that first one. It has its own identity. It doesn't sound like stuff we've seen before. That continues with this one, and it is another incredible score from Hans Zimmer. And I think that's kind of what this film is. It feels like a part 2. It doesn't feel like a sequel. It doesn't feel like we've switched it around. The budget's gone up. This has changed now. Let's throw it all at it. It is. The approach is the same as it was in the first. It is telling the story of the book. And I cannot fathom the recognition Denis Villeneuve should have for this film. I hope he's recognised. I don't know how. I hope audiences turn up for a big one. I hope this has a massive opening. I hope this goes on to be an event from that people keep going back to, or new people keep going to. Maybe they want to watch part one for the first time. It's on Netflix's homepage at the moment. The re-release made $30 million, which is massive for a re-release of a film of 2 and a bit years old. So it's going to be incredible hearing people's stories of going to see this for the first time. I sort of mentioned how flawless it is for me as a film. And that's kind of where I set my final thoughts. It's not my final thoughts. We're going to do more videos on it. But my initial thoughts on the first viewing tonight, we have witnessed something spectacular in this film, and I cannot wait for you all to get the opportunities to watch this at home. I am being really honest, I don't have any critiques for it. I think where I kind of sit with it is, if you've got issues with the first one, maybe you'll have issues with the second one. If you feel a bit cold at times, maybe that will develop. But for me, my interest with cinema, my interest with film and story, I love this kind of political science fiction. We don't get enough of it. It's a very tricky thing to pull off, and it's absolutely nailed in this once more. It leaves us such a satisfying finale, and looking down the line at what could potentially happen with the third film. And that's going to kind of round out this spoiler-free review. I hope I've given nothing away. I'm pretty sure I've given nothing away. I edit anything out that would have done that. But it's one I can't wait to talk about in more detail. We'll have some more people on the stream. We'll do a proper discussion on this. I'd have seen it multiple times at that point. You'd have all had the chance to watch it. So at this point in time, I'm probably looking at Wednesday the 8th or 9th of March, whenever the Wednesday is after the release date. That's probably a good time for us to do a stream, maybe the Tuesday or the Wednesday. So get us on our social media if you're curious about that. There is more Dune videos going. One of them's had to be scrapped on the basis of a world premiere and an actor that turned up. That was a concept for a video that's now gone. But I have mentioned about an interview. I had the very, very amazing opportunity to interview Loire Kotler earlier this week, and the video's going to go up on Friday. She's the lead vocalist from the soundtrack. Hans Zimmer's called her the voice of Dune to so many people. She's appeared on the Hans Zimmer live tours. She works on X-Men Dark Phoenix. So that was recorded on Tuesday. It was a really great discussion, and that video is going to be up on Friday. So if you want to kick off Dune, we'll be talking about it then, and there might be some more stuff later on in the month too. I've already mentioned before about a review on 1984's Dune. I'd never seen it, and I always said I'll watch it when part 2 is done, and now I've seen part 2 of Dune. Why not watch the David Lynch one from 1984? So that's going to go up next Wednesday on the channel. I've mentioned a spoiler discussion. There could be some more stuff, but yeah, it's a really exciting one. I cannot wait for people to watch this. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And as I said once more, thank you all for your support, for watching these videos. People weren't watching these, if people weren't liking our videos, subscribing, engaging with us, we wouldn't be able to see these films early to talk about them, and I hope I've done it some justice for you. So that's going to do it for this spoiler-free review today. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.